This was screened originally in January 1990, so I'm imagining that's 26 years since that was in production. I mean, just think back 88, 89. What sort of memories does that invoke in you here and now?
It's incredible. It's difficult to remember exactly how the world was then, how controversial this was then, how opposed it was then, and actually in the making it was very ignored. We were sort of like we were sort of in the shallow waters of the BBC because they had great respect for the author, not Jeanette, but the author as a concept. But then this was really difficult stuff. And so they sort of thought, well, if they ignored us, it might go away. And of course it was made and it really didn't go away. It made a huge impact. So I think that, in a way we've got to celebrate how different the world is now to the world that we made this in. But I know because of the letters I've got over the years and the letters Jeanette has over the years that it meant a lot to people on that particular journey, on the journey that we've seen about the public recording and representation of sexuality, but sort of more generally of particular groups of people who sit outside the cultural norm of whatever is the norm of telly at that time.
It was also the year of Clause 28 as well, wasn't it? Which would have been quite a pivotal thing around that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you mentioned the BBC, and we'll say that, I mean, this eventually had 6 million viewers when it was shown. Did they have any idea beforehand that this would have such reach?
No, I actually did worry when I was outside. I said, it's many, many years since I've sat all the way through Oranges. I may not remember everything, but I tell you what I do remember was showing the film to the person who ran BBC Two at the time, and he sat silently through episode 1, grumpily through 2, and we hadn't quite finished 3, and he said, well, it's not very BBC, is it? I think I thought that was a good thing even then. Yeah. I think that the BBC retrospectively, like most of the institutions I've been associated with over my lifetime, are very proud of it in retrospect.
Did you have any notion yourself at the time that you were making something which would be considered quite iconic? Were you aware of the implications of the choices you made?
I absolutely knew that this was the first lesbian love scene shown on telly because Mary Whitehouse kicked off even before it was shown.
Oh, did she?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
she kicked
off.
And in fact, there was this thing, and I haven't actually managed to get documentary evidence of it, but at the time, there was a thing where one of the papers ran a story saying, that they'd surveyed, and 67% of people thought that it shouldn't be shown. And that was before it was shown. And then in the week after it was completed, 67% of people thought it should be shown. So I thought that was an interesting, a rather made-up figure, I thought. But the journey was exactly that people were very, very frightened of it. It caused a huge amount of sort of upset in advance. But it was much loved even as it went out. Week 1, week 2. It was very much loved. Yeah. And remember, it was a time when people watched telly in a different way. So it was sort of reported about and talked about immediately after because everyone watched it at the same time. It was an event. Yeah.
What was the journey from, we'll say, Jeanette, writing the book, winning the Whitbread Award, and then it coming to you as into making a television production? Do you remember how that happened?
Yeah. No, it's actually, I think, one of the lovely stories of how Oranges came to be. So I had made a film that was very, very loved by a few people and not loved also by a bunch of people. And I remember the people who sought me out, particularly people I didn't know, who said, I loved your film. Yeah, and they wrote or they rang or they let it be known in various ways. And and I read the Passion. And so on the very same basis that you must tell people if you love something, I, through a mutual friend, dropped Jeanette a line and said, I just got to tell you, my life is better for having read The Passion, and this is what I liked, and this is the thing. And I'm sitting at home, and I get this call, and it's Jeanette. Mm-hmm. And she says, I really want to thank you for your letter. That was just such a nice letter. And we started talking, and we talked on the phone for about an hour, and we talked about life, the universe, literature, making things, being a woman. You know, we did not talk at all about oranges. And she said, well, I don't see why you're not directing Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit for telly. And I said, I don't either. I hadn't read it, was one thing. But I did go immediately, and I read it. And I went round to see her, and she got me drunk. And we discussed it, so obviously a very creative meeting as a result. And I'm a very bad drunk, and I don't drink very much, so it was a very memorable occasion. But by the end of that meeting, it was absolutely clear we're going to work together. Mm-hmm. I think what was also interesting was she's a novelist. She wasn't, a screenwriter, and she was very stuck about her own adaptation. And we came up with this sort of brilliant plan, which is that we would go away when nothing could intrude, and that she would write at night, because that was at the time her preference, and I would sleep, and she'd leave me pages, and I would read them, and by the time she'd get up, we would eat vast quantities of food and talk about why it did or didn't work, and I would give notes and so on, and then she would rewrite, and that's how we wrote Oranges.
So it's an extremely collaborative process from the off.
Yeah, but I mean, you can hear her voice. I'm not over-claiming anything. It was just a process that unlocked it for her, gave her permission in tiny bite-sized pieces to do what she does best, which is touch your heart, tell you how it is, and make you laugh, which is Jeanette's thing. But it was just a new form, and she wrote afterwards, that she felt the process was as if she said, it was as if a smart woman came into a posh gallery and paid a fortune for a vase and then dropped it on the floor and said, now let's put it together in a different shape.
Okay, very nice.
I thought that was a bit cruel. But it's a great image,
It is a fantastic image.
And that's sort of how it felt, I think, to her.
The one thing that struck me watching it now is the casting, and especially Geraldine McEwen put in an absolutely virtuoso performance. Incredible. As the mother. Can you remember much about the casting process? Was that something that was in any way difficult? Did you get the people whom you exactly wanted?
Do you know what? We did. It was a very self-selecting group.
Oh, really?
In the sense that, we made all the lists that you make when you're casting, and then you sort of reach out, and those people who have a bit more profile get to choose whether they meet you, and then the other people come one by one, desperately hoping to meet you, so there's a sort of a bit of a division. And the enthusiasm with which certain people, Celia Emery, Geraldine, a couple of the others, came towards us. I mean, it was like they were fighting to get through the door. They were not, no one was standing on ceremony. And so there was no one else. Mm-hmm. There was only Geraldine. Mm-hmm. She was who I wanted and who wanted to do it. And so it was sort of a wonderful thing. And I think that it I know it sounds a bit odd, but it felt like, I think, what people who make fringe theatre feel. Do you know what I mean? You are proud of being on the outside. You are proud of your of the way you create your group. You are pleased to be other. And that was what Oranges felt like. We were other within the big institution. They didn't quite know what we were doing, but they were letting us do it, and we were gonna, we were poachers, not gamekeepers. Mm-hmm. And that's what we felt we were doing, and we were very, very excited to be making it.
So there was a real community spirit within the making.
There absolutely was, and and again, you remember at that time there were not many women in production. There were very few female directors, writers, even producers. All three of us were women, and we made it over the summer of the BBC strikes, and I remember so we kept on being stopped filming at various points, and I remember when we were doing the love story, the love scene, the strike was called while we were in the middle of one of the takes, and we had a closed set for the girls and so on, and it was the guys in the electrical trucks decided not to let anyone know that the strike had been called, so that those two girls didn't have to do that scene again.
Oh wow!
And they let us film until I called cut on the last take, and they said, we're out. Yeah, that had been an hour and a half previously.
Wow, okay.
So we built up a community that actually was inclusive of people who you wouldn't imagine in this sort of slightly, fringe troupe, but that the heart of it, spread, and that feeling of ownership over this thing and what the cultural, social, political importance of this piece. And I must say, that we were trying to make a piece of art as well. All of that was kind of conflated into this one experience.
Within that love scene itself, did the two girls have any reservations?
No, not by the time they got there. That's something that you talk about in the audition. You talk about it in the rehearsal, you talk about it in the run-up, you rehearse it, you make it so safe by the time you get there that actually it's kind of fun to both do it and have done it. And that's one of the responsibilities that a director has is in that situation, is to make it not exploitative and to make it absolutely safe, and to make sure that nobody is beyond their comfort zone. And to be fair, I think regardless of sexuality, anything to do with, bodies, sex, self-image and so on, in any context, on any film, has to be dealt with in that way. Otherwise, you're part of the problem rather than, part of the solution.
I think that community spirit that you mentioned, that again probably came across in the sheer amount of humorous episodes that are, and they're bordering on the surreal at times, and that really came across, I think, in the viewing of it today, because I think it can be seen as almost like maybe such a serious issues that you're dealing with, that people can almost bypass the sense of fun that was very evident.
Well, I actually think humour's the great secret weapon in all contexts of life, and particularly in drama. I think one of the big problems that I had approaching the book was finally resolved with the 3 intro scenes. But that Jeanette went off on this whole other narrative in the book that was sort of in a more magical world, and I just felt it didn't quite have a place in the drama as such, that it would distort the sense of making this very extreme set of characters authentic. But at the same time, the metaphor and the imagery and the Jeanette of it, needed to be honoured. And I don't remember exactly when I came up with it, but one of the things was, and it was a sort of a hugely ambitious, disproportionately expensive, and completely unusual thing to shoot such extravagant sequences to open each episode, to make them different, and to spend most of your cash on them. But it seemed to me to be honouring the novelistic quality, but also something, I think, I'm sorry to use the same words again, but the other that she always brings into her work, to keep it in residence without letting it destroy this idea that I had about not allowing these people to be extreme but authentic, which I think also, speaking to your point about humour, I think that also makes you love Mum. You know, the fact that she's so funny, you know, I was absolutely determined not to demonise Mum. And that humour is, you know, the way it undercuts the horror of what she delivers and her world of view. That's the tool, that's the mechanism by which you actually sort of see her limitations as human, as well as all the things that you have to see are just simply abusive.
Yeah, but the figure, I mean, the only sort of significant male figure really is the pastor. He
doesn't get away quite so lightly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Yeah, he's not quite as easily lovable.
No, but you know, pastors represent institutions as well as their own selves, and I think that we're allowed in that context. You know, they bring with them a lot more, and they, you know, we're representing the whole, not just the person. I was very gratified because we walked in right at the end, and everyone who tittered when Dad said, "Amen." Thank you. We always loved that. Jeanette and I, you know, the idea that, you know, this man was utterly silent throughout the whole thing, and then finally, you know, says something to the hymn of it all. You know, so we felt he was a very important character, even though he, in his absence, as a male character as well.
We'll take some questions from the audience. We have a roving mic. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, I can see you. We could have had the lights on the whole time.
Is there any questions? Yes.
Hi, since nobody's asking, I'll kick off. It was a very seminal work, and I really enjoyed it. And I mean, I'm from the ethnic minority community, and I'd never heard about this before. And I was just thinking, is there sort of afterlife? Is there like, I mean, obviously, we live in a very different world, as you say, but then this isn't probably in certain communities in this country. I mean, this would still be a taboo work. So, does oranges are not the only fruit have some salience for that, or relevance, or educational value?
I think it's a really interesting question, and you know, lots of people from lots of communities have found it over the years, and it's easier to find now. You can get it on DVD and so on, and it does continue to do that work. My favourite story about where oranges was used in the way that I think you're suggesting was quite recently when I met someone actually just in late spring this year, so you know, it's 26 years old, remember, and I met her on a completely different subject, different context, quite in an official capacity, and we had a very long meeting about sort of policy matters. And then as she was leaving, she said, I just want you to know that in the 90s I was in Afghanistan, and I was teaching women in unofficial schools in people's homes, and we used oranges as a mechanism to talk about power, gender, sexuality, religion, and so on. And I had one of those sort of incredible moments that you have, you know, if you're lucky in your life, where you just kind of go, fuck me, I did something that mattered. You know, and I've had that, and this piece of work has had that effect on many, many people, and, you know, I can only be, you know, gratified and you know, humbled by the fact that it was received so well in so many different contexts for so many years, and that you guys are even here now, you know, after all the event. And Jeanette says hi, by the way. She was going to try and come with me as a surprise, but unfortunately she was stuck in the country. But that is not because it was just that story, but because that story is true dozens, scores, hundreds of times over. It has been used even in places we don't know, and I do think it remains relevant. And it is, you know, obviously both Jeanette's very personal, a personal situation, but it is, of course, a metaphor for so many situations and so many contexts.
I guess considering, I mean, how varied your career has been since, it is quite a testament that this is still being shown in cinemas 26 years later, and what originally was a television series.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to telly of the time. It's a testament to Jeanette's story. I think probably there are people in the audience who've then read How to Be Happy, when she sort of retells her story with a few more pieces in it, and that story still had a huge impact in that form. We do pick it up every now and again and think we might do a theatre version of it, and then put it away, and then pick it up and put it away. It may well happen one day. But it does still seem to hold something truly important, irrespective of how the world has changed. Absolutely, yeah. You know.
Any more further questions from the audience for Beeban? I think there's a woman.
Hi, I grew up near that part of the world, and a lot of the characters reminded me of characters from my childhood. But I actually have quite a practical question. I was trying to gauge where the locations were, and I was thinking it was Stalybridge, Rochdale.
Yeah, and Rawtenstall. Have I pronounced that right? Rawtenstall? R-A-W...
In Lancashire?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thanks.
But you're right, it was all around there. Yeah.
Yeah, because I could recognise the Pennines, but then it seemed to dip in, so I thought you had quite a few locations.
We did. Do you know what? I have to be honest, much time under the bridge, many locations, can't remember exactly, but I was in Stalybridge, I was in Rawtenstall, and it was all shot on location in that area.
Yeah.
We didn't then go somewhere else.
Yeah, lots of grey skies in the summer, I can see.
Exactly.
I think the authenticity of the piece as well, in terms of time, comes across very, very well still. Was that difficult to achieve?
Well, it was interesting because I had this idea that the time should be emblematic rather than actual. So there's very, very few props and very few markers, but they were very, carefully chosen. I don't mean carefully like we're careful and other people weren't. I mean they were edited down into very small, few things that would kind of create a time rather than... and that was actually, I've got to be honest, that was partly... driven by the fact that we had a very low budget and it's expensive to do period. I do think also the costumes were amazing, and actually those are your greatest walking props in a way, and the colour scheme was very, very kind of fascist, so you sort of really knew where you were at any given moment. So I think a lot of the era was sort of evoked rather than delivered, is probably the best way of putting it, and it's something that I have done in other contexts, but it's something that I've noticed other directors do, and I do think it's a very successful way of trying to approach period, because it's sort of almost annoying when you have too many OXO cubes in the background and you're kind of distracted by signifiers, exactly. Yeah.
We'll be taking another question from the audience for Beeban. I think there's...
Hello. I was just wondering if you have considered over the years adapting any other of Jeanette Winterson's works.
We talked about the Passion, and funnily enough, I spoke to her last night. The reason that I spoke to her last night was she asked me about something she's just doing. So the easy answer is yes. We did make one other film together. It was not a successful film, unfortunately. After Oranges, we made, can you believe this? I feel really embarrassed that I'm about to forget the name of my own film. I hope that shows a lack of narcissism rather than age. Oh my God, I can remember the whole story, and I can remember Dorothy Tudor and Vanessa Redgrave and John Hurt. I can remember everything but the title. Anyway, forgive me. It's on IMDb. I have outsourced myself. And it wasn't a successful film. And one of the things, and I'm now going to make a director bleat, which is that one of the things was that my love of Jeanette and the group, you know, Philippa and Rachel Portman and all the people who were involved, who then became all involved in the film, was greater than my rigour about what the film was. Yeah? And so it was a case where personal overcame, you know, the creative. And I regret that on all our behalves, because, of course, you have to be creatively rigorous above and beyond the personal. So it wasn't a great film. There were marvellous things in it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was some of the humour, some of the things. And actually, one of the great moments of my directing life was when Vanessa Redgrave came up to me and said, look, I've got to do a lesbian love scene with Dorothy Tudor, but I don't know how to do that. Will you show me how? And so I was on the floor with Dorothy Tudor at one point during this. You know, I mean, that was great. You know, there were so many brilliant scenes, so much good writing, so much brilliant work. But you know what films are? They're 51%. You know, they either work or they don't. And this was 49. So, you know, we did try again, and the fact that we haven't since is really much, much more to do with circumstances, lives led, the fact that when you get on a movie, it actually takes 2 years of your life, and so your rhythms and so on. But we have all remained powerfully good friends, and so the personal has won out, I'm afraid. It may yet come again.
Considering Oranges was so successful when it was first broadcast, did you feel under any undue pressure to follow that with something of similar reach?
Well, funnily enough, I think I was, not because I had the greatest foresight, just because I was the most involved. I was the first one who realised it was going to be both controversial and big. I didn't know it was going to be loved the way it was. I knew it was going to be big, and it became clear to me, and I panicked, and I thought, well, I cannot lay myself open to this entirely, and so I immediately took another job, and I made another very favourite film of mine, which is called Antonio and Jane. And that film also made, it was a single for BBC Two, but also remarkably was very successful, but in a completely different way. And it was bought by Miramax and taken to America, and actually was the reason that I ended up going to Hollywood, because you know, it was so well reviewed and so well loved in America, perhaps a great deal more than here, and it was about female friendship, really. And so by the time Oranges came out, I was sort of midway through Antonio and Jane, and sort of preoccupied with that, and the whole furore was sort of, it was very apparent to me, but it was not, I wasn't sitting facing it sort of in that naked way you are when something comes out and that's your job to deal with it. I kind of moved on. So that was very fortunate, and it was actually a very good decision, I think, for me, just personally. I think that Jeanette had lived through Oranges being a huge thing already with the novel, and in a way was very gratified that the filming of it was as loved. And so, you know, it's that other creative thing where you don't have success, you just have relief, you know. So I think that we were all really kind of properly grounded about the whole thing, and it was only the BBC who were absolutely blown away and couldn't believe that they had this sort of rather gold dust thing. And I suppose, you know, just sharing a really sweet moment, I think, and one of the great proud moments of its reception was at the BAFTA Awards that year. Not the BAFTA that we actually were nominated for and won, but the BAFTA for Best Actress had 4 nominees, 3 of which were from Oranges. And we were really proud of that.
That's pretty impressive.
We were really proud of that. You know, all of our girls, you know, we loved that. And when they read them out and they showed the clips and it was those 3, you know.
A good feeling, a good kind of moment of satisfaction.
Yeah, because, you know, kind of going back to the sort of, you know, the crowd that we were, the
Community spirit.
The community spirit, that included all the performers, obviously, and so, you know, it was your own, it was your family.
Will we take another question for Beeban from the audience?
You said earlier, you talked about feeling like the poachers, not the gamekeepers in the industry. How much do you feel has changed now, both in terms of making films, but also in terms of the representation of women and women's sexuality on film?
Oh. It's such a difficult... that is such a good question, such a difficult question, and something I struggle to answer. And not because I'm shy of thinking about it. I think about it quite a lot. But just because I find it complex. I think that you have to sort of unpack it, you know, that there is more... I think one of the things that's interesting in just a purely commercial way is that one of the biggest ticket buyers for cinema are older women. That has changed what is being made and the representation of women, yeah? There are more women, you know, in directorial writing, producing roles, and they make, you know, not all of them, but a large proportion of them have made a difference to what is being made and how women are represented. But I think that you've got to take visual media as a whole. I don't think film doesn't sit in its own place, and then there's, you know, obviously I think the question, I don't know whether it's film or telly, but let's put it all together. And I think that the pornification of television, if you like, you know, the sort of gamification, pornification, and some of the big high series that I see, I find deeply offensive, you know, deeply, deeply offensive. And some of the concepts around beauty and the sort of you know, some of the acceptable narratives around, you know, interrelationships and the age gaps and those things are, you know, very problematic, you know. So I think you kind of have to slice it into tiny little bits and say, you know, you cannot say it's all great. It's not great. I think it's probably, you know, overall, I think it's quite disturbing. However, if you're looking for yourself and you're looking for what you want to watch and you're looking for who you want to be making it, there is a great deal more to find, you know. And also, you have to sort of put into the mix that you can find a lot more historic world, you know, broad groups of things for longer periods of time. So the tail of things is a lot longer, not just I play out like other people can see oranges, you know, for however, but you know, DVDs, downloads, etc., etc. So the global availability of brilliant stories about women, for women, starring women, made by women, etc., is much, much greater than when I was a young woman. You know, you could go, it was like a fucking desert. You know, you could go a couple of years without seeing anything you wanted to see. You know, and it's all there to be seen. The task of getting through the shit to find it, I think, is really, really problematic. And I find it really problematic, particularly about for young women and particularly for you know, for very young girls who maybe don't get to telly and film quite as quickly as they get to see a morass of other stuff first. So I'm sorry for such a long answer, but that is my answer.
I think we might have time just for one more question from the audience. If anybody is brave enough to ask the final question to Beeban.
Hello. She's written a biography of her life, biography of her life, which was reviewed very well. Do you ever think of collaborating again on a film score with her? or another.
Sorry, did you say Jeanette has?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Well, I sort of answered that before in the sense that...
Oh, 'cause I'm sorry. I'm so old.
No, that's all right. We're all old now. That's
Not as old as me.
You know, I would be surprised if Jeanette and I go to our grave without collaborating in some way or
Because it's a
other.
very good book.
You mean How to Be Happy?
Yes, yes.
You know, why be normal when
Yeah.
you could be happy?
Yeah.
Or why be happy when you could be normal?
Yeah,
in fact,
well,
more
I'd be happy
importantly.
if I was normal.
I think there's a theme here that I'm not very good with titles, isn't there? There's a bit of a theme going on here. It was a very good book, and it was a book that I read several times in its several iterations on its way, and I feel kind of both delighted, relieved, and all sorts of other very mixed emotions about, but all good ones, about the fact that it was so brilliantly received for Jeanette, because it was a very difficult book for her to put out into the world. So, you know, the question of whether to remake that story and to suggest that this is a more authentic version of her life, I think is a more difficult question, because I think that one assesses one's life in many different ways, and that that sometimes metaphor or outsourcing or putting your life into sort of slightly hidden place can be as powerful as telling an absolute truth. And so I am not sure whether we need to see the story again. And it is a question, not an... I'm not saying I definitely know. I'm saying that is something that I think one has to question very hard.
Yeah, whereas Oranges was semi-fiction, this is her life, you know, which I think in a way it's a shame or pity that the biography historically was before.
You
was
think
not
it's
written
a
before.
pity that Oranges came before this other...
Well, because we know so much more about her life now, which is, you know, funny, sad, very upsetting, I think that would make a brilliant film.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take, because it's the final question, I'm going to take issue with the idea...
I knew you could.
No, just that the one is better before, because
Well,
I think you might have to consider whether Oranges allowed her to write the book she wrote. Yeah? Is it not part of her journey to actually revealing some things that are very hurtful in the public arena and involved other people beyond those who appear in Oranges? Is it not possible that the love that you all have shown, and many other people like you, to her via Oranges is not part of the reason that she was able to write that book? I would probably, I'm not saying that this is her view, I'm saying my view is she couldn't have written the other book.
Well, the great thing about Oranges, it helped lesbians.
It did. And that was also what I was going to say. Could she have written that book then, you know, at the time at which she did? Oranges was a phenomenally brave and bold and gorgeous undertaking.
Beautiful film. Beautiful film.
Not the film. I mean the book.
Well,
and
the film. Your depiction of the sexual scene or the love scene is wonderful, because now you sort of get salaciousness and really a titivation for men, whereas that was a pure and wonderful.
Well, you know, obviously I'm thrilled that you love it, and I'm gratified, and thank you for that. I think that the thing that I think is, I mean, it's a good way to end. You asked me right at the beginning, you know, what was different about those times to now, you know, and it's one of the, you know, I'm not sure how I feel about marriage, actually, guys. I am married myself, but I'm not sure how much I feel. But I felt very proud on the day I walked through the thing and voted for gay marriage, and it became a thing. And Jeanette, and I was very proud to make a speech at Jeanette's marriage the other day, earlier this summer, and be able to do that and so on. And these are those times now, yeah? And it's one area where we have seen social progress in a phenomenal way. And I would like to say sort of, to Jeanette, rather than on her behalf, or even on my behalf, I played one part in it. I'm very proud of it. I was absolutely instrumental. I'm not being over modest. But to Jeanette, that Oranges was part of that journey. Oranges was part of what brought us to here. And that's an incredible thing to witness in your own lifetime. So those times were very different. These times are now. I don't think she could have written that book then.
And that's a great note, I think, to finish up with. Beeban Kidron, thank you very much.